Donald Trump under fire for his pick to lead the EPA, who the president-elect consulted before making his decision. What would it take to overturn Roe versus Wade? A SCOTUS blog founder joins me. Crisis in South Sudan. My one-on-one interview with the new head of bishops there about what the church is doing to help 1.3 million refugees. And the Holy Father's message of yes on this Feast of the Immaculate Conception. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, December 8th, 2016. Good evening from Washington, D.C. on this feast day of the Immaculate Conception. And thank you to those joining us from around the world. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We begin with breaking news. John Glenn, the first U.S. astronaut to orbit Earth, who later spent 24 years representing Ohio in the Senate, has died at 95. The American space hero was known for his easy smile, a strong marriage of 70 years, and nerves of steel. Glenn passed away in Columbus, Ohio. President-elect Donald Trump travels to Ohio to comfort the victims of last month's attack at Ohio State University. The trip follows more reports of Trump's cabinet picks. Andrew Pudzer, head of fast food restaurants Hardee's and Carl's Jr., is expected to lead the Labor Department. Pudzer was one of Trump's earliest campaign financiers. And Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, a global warming skeptic, has been picked by Trump to head the Environmental Protection Agency. This after meeting with climate protection activist Leonardo DiCaprio, and also Trump met with this man.
I found it an extremely interesting conversation.
Before making his decision, Donald Trump consulted with Al Gore, the former vice president and climate change activist, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in the field. But Trump's tapping a climate change skeptic to lead the EPA. Democrats are outraged.
Now we learned that the head of the EPA actually is suing EPA and does not accept the acceptance on climate change.
Scott Pruitt is the Attorney General of Oklahoma who has repeatedly sued the agency. His official biography describes him as having been a leading voice for fiscal responsibility, religious freedom, and pro-life issues. Pruitt has been a vocal denier of global warming and its link to man-made carbon emissions. He argues that curbing carbon emissions tramples the rights of states, drives up electricity rates, threatens the reliability of the nation's power grid, and creates economic havoc. The incoming administration calls Pruitt a lawyer for a lawless EPA. It's expected he'll hold the EPA accountable.
The EPA's authority now, I think, is grossly outdated. And so now I think is the perfect opportunity for sensible environmental reform that shifts the focus away from Washington and back to these state and local governments.
Several of the president-elect's picks came to the Capitol today to try to win over Republicans and skeptical Democrats. This as the House just took its last votes of the year. Jason Calvi continues our team coverage on the shaping of a cabinet. Jason.
Lauren, the woman who wanted to make those cabinet appointments is here at the Capitol tonight. Hillary Clinton is taking part in a farewell ceremony for Senator Harry Reid. But Donald Trump is our president-elect, and his choices are being met here with some excitement as well as some anger.
Rather than draining the swamp, he is now filling it up with hungry crocodiles.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus blasts Trump's cabinet picks as several of them visit the Capitol today. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, the president-elect's pick to be the ambassador to the United Nations. Trump's pick to lead the Treasury Department, Steven Mnuchin. And Trump's nominee to be Health and Human Services Secretary, Congressman and Dr. Tom Price, another target of the Progressive Caucus today.
When asked about access to contraception for low-income women, Price said, and I quote, "Bring me one woman who has been left behind."
Under President Obama's watch, HHS issued a mandate that nearly all employers need to provide health coverage of contraceptives, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs. Price wrote at the time, "This mandate ought to be reversed, the right to religious freedom protected, and the entire health care law repealed." Catholic Medical Association writes of Price this week, We trust that he will play a key role in developing a healthcare reform proposal that protects life and consciences, and that he will repeal the ACA contraception and HHS transgender mandates. The group also praised Price, who as budget chairman tried to defund Planned Parenthood, a move backed by Wyoming Representative Cynthia Loomis.
They can fund what they do without using taxpayer dollars to fund a procedure that many people just find reprehensible.
The HHS contraceptive mandate was not put into place by Congress, but by the leadership of the HHS secretary. That means it will be easy to reverse with the new secretary coming into power. Lauren?
Jason, we should also mention that EWTN is in a lawsuit with the administration. What is happening with those lawsuits, including EWTN's?
Well, right, and I did speak to one of the lawyers who's fighting several of these cases. He's fighting on behalf of many different plaintiffs, and he says right now most of the cases are on hold. He says even with the next attorney general, that person could then decide to settle these cases in favor of groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor and EWTN.
Jason Calvi reporting on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Congress passes a defense bill which gives troops a pay raise and denies President Obama's request to cut the size of the military and close Guantanamo Bay. The House also passed an overall spending bill to keep the government running. And Iraqi troops fighting to liberate the city of Mosul are met with fierce resistance. Defense officials confirm ISIS is pushing security forces back in one of the biggest counteroffensives they've seen in the last few months. Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the Pentagon.
Lauren, authorities here at the Pentagon are still confident Iraqi troops working with coalition forces will ultimately retake Mosul, but right now it's a tough fight. Heavy fighting continues in and around Mosul, where the Iraqi army is attempting to dislodge ISIS militants. But Iraqis are pulling back from a strategic part of central Mosul after getting hit with 6 suicide car bombings. Air Force Colonel John Dorian, who is based in Baghdad, tells Pentagon officials coalition planes bombed a hospital being used as a base by ISIS militants.
We didn't have any indication that civilians were at risk at the time of the strike.
The fighting has forced thousands more Iraqis to flee the city, but not everyone can. This Mosul resident says he won't go anywhere. The best and safest place is his home. Colonel Dorian agrees. He says ISIS snipers are targeting civilians.
And to leave your home in ISIL's hands may mean that ISIL will have more opportunity to plant many of the booby traps and explosive devices.
Civilians are also in danger west of Iraq in Aleppo, Syria, where tens of thousands of people are fleeing civil war. The U.S. calls for a temporary ceasefire in order to get humanitarian aid into rebel-held parts of the city. But Syrian President Bashar Assad won't stop the attack. The Pentagon says it's working with Syrian rebels to bomb ISIS headquarters in Raqqa, which is east of Aleppo and northwest of Baghdad. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee at the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. The head of the Knights of Columbus wants America to support Christians who survived genocide in Iraq. Carl Anderson teamed up with the Chaldean Catholic Archbishop of Erbil to publish a plea for help. They say Iraq's Christian population dropped dramatically when U.S. troops left Iraq and al-Qaeda morphed into ISIS. Anderson says America's lack of financial support for those who survived ISIS's genocide is shocking, and American inaction is simply not acceptable. He encourages the Trump administration to better support the survivors. The multi-billion-dollar bill to boost federal spending for medical research on cancer and other diseases is headed to President Obama's desk.
The ayes are 94, the nays are 5. The motion is agreed to.
Senators voted yesterday to approve the 21st Century Cures Act. The bill would allow the government to spend $6.3 billion on research to cure diseases, as well as fight the mental health crisis and opioid epidemic in the country. President Obama is expected to sign the legislation into law. After voting for the 21st Century Cures Act, senators paid tribute to Vice President Joe Biden, whose son died of cancer.
Steven Spielberg, Hollywood, you should be listening. Joe Biden's life is the stuff for which movies are made.
Senators from both sides of the aisle praised Biden for his sense of humor and character.
I don't always agree with him, but I do trust him implicitly. He doesn't break his word. He doesn't waste time telling me why I'm wrong. He gets down to brass tacks, and he keeps in sight the stakes.
Biden served in the Senate for 36 years before he became vice president and president of the Senate. The Supreme Court weighs in on several cases this week. Justices sided with Samsung in its high-profile patent dispute with Apple. They sided with the government in a legal clash over the nation's insider trading laws, and they upheld a fraud case against State Farm Insurance that was connected to Hurricane Katrina. Amy Howe is a co-founder of SCOTUS blog, which analyzes the Supreme Court. Amy, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Will the court hear a case involving transgender bathrooms? Many of the cases to date have been, less than controversial, as we just saw. Is the court avoiding divisive cases?
It's hard to say for sure. We know a couple of things, and you can point to cases like the transgender bathroom case, which is certainly a controversial issue. The justices of the Supreme Court would tell you that most of the cases that the Supreme Court decided are unanimous or nearly unanimous, that the court is getting work done. And it's hard to point to particular cases that the court isn't necessarily taking. But there are a couple of potentially controversial cases, and the cases that many of us care about are the ones that are 5-4 or 5-3 that have not been scheduled for oral argument yet. In particular, one involving a church in Missouri that didn't get a grant from the state to resurface its playground precisely because it was a church. And so that was actually a case that the Supreme Court announced it would review in January of 2015. And as of January 2016, as of January 2017, it still hasn't been scheduled for oral argument yet, along with a couple of other cases. And that suggests that the justices want to wait for a ninth justice to take on some of these more controversial cases.
That vacancy certainly has had a big impact of the cases that they're going to hear. Now, Donald Trump recently said that the issue of gay marriage is settled law. Is he right, or could a lower court under a Trump administration resurrect the issue?
A lower court couldn't do it. It would have to be something that the Supreme Court would take up. And the Supreme Court often tends to follow sort of, even though they would tell you that they're deciding on the law, they frequently tend to sort of mirror society's views on the case. And so, abortion remains a very controversial issue. Same-sex marriage, I think, is becoming more accepted, and I think maybe that's why he suggested that same-sex marriage is not an issue that the Supreme Court's likely to overrule.
Pro-choice groups are saying, Roe versus Wade is in peril. What would it take to overturn Roe versus Wade and send the decision back to the states?
So it's a two-part answer. And the first is that Donald Trump has said that he will appoint justices who are pro-life. And so we'd expect that whoever he's going to nominate to replace Justice Antonin Scalia will be pro-life. But that would still probably only bring the vote on the court to 5-4. Last term, the Supreme Court struck down a Texas law restricting abortions that the supporters of the law said was intended to protect women's health. Abortion rights activists said that it violated the Constitution, and 5 justices of the Supreme Court struck those provisions down. The 5 justices in that majority, though, included Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who will be 84 in March,
and a lot
Anthony
of people
Kennedy,
could be retiring,
who's
right.
80, and Stephen Breyer, who's in his late 70s. And so if any of those 3 justices were to step down,
then you would see something
you
that
could
could
really
possibly lead to
see
it.
something that could lead to overturning Roe versus Wade.
Thank you so much. Amy Howe, co-founder of the SCOTUS blog.
Thanks
Thank you for joining us.
Coming up, Sudan's Bishop Eduardo joins us to talk about the crisis in his country, what the Catholic Church is doing to help, and white roses for Our Lady on the feast day of the Immaculate Conception.
5 years after gaining its independence, South Sudan is racked by civil war that has caused more than 1 million people to flee the nation and left most people on the brink of starvation. The East African nation is experiencing ethnic cleansing in several parts of the country, according to the UN. Investigators say rape and sexual violence have reached epic proportions. The UN is urging the international community to put sanctions and an arms embargo in place, in addition to deploying thousands of peacekeepers to avert catastrophe. And according to the Vatican, about 40% of the population in South Sudan is Catholic, and the church is playing a critical role in trying to resolve the deep-rooted political and ethnic divisions.
It's challenging, it is desperate, but I still have hope. I've not lost hope.
Bishop Eduardo Kassala is from the Diocese of Tombora-Yambio. A group called the Sudan Relief Fund works closely with him to bring food, safe drinking water, and medical attention to his people. Bishop Eduardo Kassala is taking over in January as the president of the Conference of Bishops in Sudan and South Sudan. He joins us now. Your Excellency, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Give us an idea of some of the challenges and horrors that you have seen on the streets of your city.
Yeah, the challenges of the two countries is because of the civil war in different parts of those two countries, where between the armed groups, those who fight are the innocent, the civilian who are in the middle, and they take the impact of the war.
What have you seen?
I've seen people dead. I've seen people fleeing their own homes. I've seen people leaving the country and becoming refugees. And I've seen people hungry. And I've seen properties destroyed.
And what I understand?
I've seen hopeless youth. They don't know what comes next. I've seen people traumatized, and I am also traumatized by the problems there in the
I'm
country.
sure you are. So
Yeah.
even though you are traumatized, you have risked your life meeting with rebels in order to bring together peace. Tell us about those negotiations and what you were able to accomplish.
In fact, when you are before problems, and then God provides you the courage, He gives you the wisdom, and He gives you the energy to go. When we got into this problem, that young people went into the bush and who were soldiers with guns, and the other side is the government. The civilian and community was terrorized, was scared.
And you went in.
And yes, we have
and
to
what
choose.
did you do?
What we did after we had requested the government to give us the permission to talk to those young people, to those men in the bush, we have to go to meet them. We tried to go to meet them. And the first time, we didn't know what we were going to meet. And we met people with guns. And
were you
twice,
scared?
Sure, of course, we were scared, but I have to take courage because I was the leader of the group. We were all together, Muslims and Christians, as an interfaith, and to go to meet these people in the bush.
And you were able to, from what I understand, convince about 1,500, 1,400 soldiers to stop fighting.
About over 3,000.
3,000.
Over 3,000.
Stopped fighting, and there's still a civil war going on. Some of the things that you were able to, through your courage, stop happening were some of the rapes. 70% of the women in your capital city in South Sudan have experienced sexual assault since the civil war began. And it's just staggering. How do women protect themselves? How can you help them?
I think here we speak about it. The only way we can help, the church has a moral voice. We speak, but guys with guns, people with guns, there's nothing you can do, and they can do what they want at the point or at the gunpoint, and that's why women and old people fall victim to that.
Bishop Eduardo Kassala, thank you so much for telling your story and for joining us.
Thank you, Dan, for giving me this opportunity to be here. And I ask God's blessing upon you. And I ask the people of God in this beautiful nation to pray for us, to pray for peace in South Sudan and Sudan, in Africa and all over the world. Thank you for hosting me, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And if you would like to help, please visit SudanReliefFund.com. You can find more information on EWTN's Facebook and Twitter accounts. And today is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, celebrated each year on December 8th to mark the day in 1854 when Pope Pius IX declared the dogma that the Virgin Mary was conceived without sin. Celebrations take place throughout the world. In Rome, Pope Francis follows in the footsteps of his predecessors by paying homage to the statue of the Virgin Mary near the Spanish Steps. Traffic stopped and holiday shoppers paused to catch a glimpse of the Holy Father as he arrived, bringing with him a bouquet of white roses, which he placed at the base of the statue. The Pope honored Mary, saying, "You remind us that before all else there is God's grace. There is love of Jesus Christ who gave his life for us. There is the strength of the Holy Spirit who makes all things new." The Holy Father's personally written prayer also uplifted children, families, the unemployed, and the poor and the lonely. Pope John Paul II's closest aide retires as the head of the church in Krakow, Poland. Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz submitted his resignation 2 years ago when he turned 75. Pope Francis urged the cardinal to stay on until World Youth Day ended in Krakow this summer. He served as personal secretary to St. John Paul II before being named Archbishop of Krakow.
Up next, a Bethlehem hospital is helping families 500 yards away from the birthplace of Christ. We'll talk to the president of the hospital's foundation. And the Holy Father's message on this Feast of the Immaculate Conception. The yes, Pope Francis says, is the most important yes in history.
Thousands gather in St. Peter's Square today to hear Pope Francis's Angelus address for the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. In his remark, the Pope said Mary's yes to God is the most important yes in history. It overcomes the no, born of pride, that led to man's original sin. The Holy Father encourages us all during this time of Advent to give our personal yes to God with generosity and trust like Mary did. Support is needed for a hospital doing life-saving work just yards away from the birthplace of Christ. The Holy Family Hospital of Bethlehem Foundation is a nonprofit Catholic organization with a mission to deliver peace in the Holy Land. Michelle Burke-Bowe is president of the Holy Family Foundation, and she joins me now. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us about this hospital. How did it get its start?
Well, it started a long time ago, about 160 years ago, with the Daughters of Charity, who were running a general hospital. And they were doing a wonderful job, and in about 1988, they were having a hard time with funding. The political situation was tense. There weren't many sisters, so they do what all good sisters do. They picked up the phone and they called the Holy Father, and they said, "Holy Father, help us retain this Christian presence in the Holy Land."
You know, how does the location of the program help with its mission? I'm sure that it being within, 500 or 1,500 steps of the birthplace is a real plus.
You know, it's 1,500 steps door to door. And it's just so beautiful to know that every day at least 10 babies are born in our hospital, just steps away from the manger where the Christ child was born.
And what is it, you just were there in Bethlehem and you're based here in the United States. Tell me about that experience and why this hospital is so near and dear to your heart.
You know, we deliver life, peace, and hope. So it is very much a Catholic teaching hospital. It's a pro-life mission. We save babies who are born weighing as little as 630 grams, about 1 pound, the tiniest of babies. We give hope through employment, through helping families to grow, for taking care of older women, for cancer screenings and surgeries, gynecological surgeries. And of course, we deliver babies.
That's the best,
Yeah.
right? Is it, there's so much going on in Bethlehem right now with political conflicts, other problems. It makes it very difficult to get in and out of Bethlehem, I would imagine. And how do Christians and then Muslims unite at the hospital, or don't they?
You know, our hospital is a very special place because we are probably the largest employer in Bethlehem, and we employ both Christians and Muslims who work together side by side, taking care of the sick and the poor, who are also Christians and Muslims.
How many people?
We employ 159 people, and I feel very proud of that because it just makes such a difference in the economy and the life of people in the whole region.
All right, thank you so much. Michelle Burke Bow is the president of the Holy Family Foundation. Loved having you on our program.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis is ready to send out his Christmas cards. That makes one of us. It features Joe Cho's painting of the Nativity. It can be found in the lower Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi and is the only artwork showing the Nativity scene with two images of baby Jesus. One expresses the human, the other the divine nature of Christ. To read more about that Christmas card, including the Bible verse the Pope chose for the card, head to our partners at the National Catholic Register, ncregister.com. Well, for all of us here at the EWTN News Nightly team, for all of you watching around the world, thank you. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night, and God bless.